Funding for the Stories of Louisiana's Black Church is provided by.
When morning came to Louisiana, we were hopeful, not hibernating. We were stronger, ready for what's next. And together, as we build anew, Blue Cross stands ready to support you.
Hi, I'm Patrick, employee at ExxonMobil and pastor of Believers Assembly of Baton Rouge. I'm so glad ExxonMobil is sponsoring the Louisiana Black Church on LPB, and I hope you enjoy watching it.
And by CSRS, building stronger, smarter communities together.
Entergy is proud to support programming on LPB and greener practices that preserve Louisiana.
The goal of our environmental and sustainability initiatives really is to ensure that our kids and future generations can be left with a cleaner planet.
Additional support provided by the Fred B. and Ruth B. Ziegler Foundation and the Ziegler Art Museum located in Jennings City Hall. The museum focuses on emerging Louisiana artists and is an historical and cultural center for Southwest Louisiana. And the Foundation for Excellence in Louisiana Public Broadcasting, with support from viewers like you.
I would argue that those actions actually were a step in the wrong direction.
State leaders push back on the president's plan for climate change.
This isn't just a disease.
All of us coping with coronavirus.
Just realizing it and coping with it and just getting over it was the only thing you really could do.
High school athletes brace for a future with fewer prospects.
What makes American religion American is the African and African American.
The history of Black churches told through Louisiana sanctuaries.
Hi, I'm Kara St. Cyr.
And I'm Andre Moreau. Much more of those top stories in a moment on this week's edition of SWI. But first,
the latest numbers on the coronavirus: 863 new cases and 32 new deaths. Total cases approaching 410,000 with more than 9,000 deaths.
As vaccination opportunity crawls along, COVID mutations or variants are potentially moving more quickly, and that is bringing new worries.
We are not only just managing the current COVID caseload, we're also concerned about a fourth surge that could be driven by the new variants, particularly the B117 variant, the UK variant, which is present now in 35 or more states and in multiple communities here in Louisiana.
It's hitting us at just a time when we are recovering from this very big spike, the largest spike we've had in the pandemic over Christmas and New Year's. And the nature of this is that our ability to detect the variant pales in comparison to how widespread it probably is. As a country, we don't do a lot of what's called genomic sequencing. We don't do a lot of sequencing of the actual virus itself. Some other European countries do much more of it. So we know that when we do identify cases like this, that it's a tip of the iceberg scenario. There's much more out there, no doubt.
Beginning Monday, the state will allow people 65 and older to get vaccinated. And now we'll look at other headlines making news across Louisiana. The state's recent sugarcane harvest is expected to set a record at almost 2 million tons of sugar once grinding of cane is complete. The LSU Ag Center says even with the overactive hurricane season, that most of the planting was done by the time Hurricane Laura hit in August. The harvest began in September and continued for almost 125 straight days in some areas. The state's public schools have been slow to spend federal coronavirus aid received 9 months ago to defray pandemic expenses. They are scheduled to get another $1.1 billion, even though they haven't spent more than half of the $287 million received last April. The money sent to districts was to cover costs for computers, summer school, personal protective equipment, and other expenses related to the virus outbreak. An audit released Monday shows most state agencies did not have work-from-home policies in place before the pandemic. A legislative auditor survey led to the findings. 84% of agency leaders responded to the survey, and 47% of workers say technology barriers made it tough to carry out jobs working remotely from home. The State Office of Tourism and Lieutenant Governor Billy Nungesser this week announced the launch of the Louisiana Civil Rights Trail. The trail brings together the events of the 1950s and 60s that place our state at the center of the national civil rights movement. You can check it out at LouisianaCivilRightsTrail.com. Former State Senate President Michael O'Keefe died this week from cancer at his home in New Orleans. He was a powerful political figure in the 1970s and 80s. His career ended when he was convicted in a series of scandals and spent nearly 20 years in federal prison. Michael O'Keefe was 89.
We knew Mardi Gras would be very different this year, but few anticipated all New Orleans bars would close completely until after Fat Tuesday. That goes into effect next Friday, February 12th.
Yeah, it's something hard to imagine. New Orleans Mayor LaToya Cantrell making the announcement today, though, in an effort, she says, to prevent a super spreader event. The move comes after large crowds were spotted on Bourbon Street and in the French Quarter last weekend.
The bar ban is citywide, no liquor sales at all in the French Quarter. That again from February 12th through Mardi Gras Day.
Hoping to persuade President Biden to slow down his sweeping actions to fight climate change is just one big item where we've seen Senator Bill Cassidy out front and center this week. This after oil and gas leaders warned that Biden's agenda could devastate Louisiana's economy that's already under the crushing blow of the coronavirus. I talked with state and national leaders, a lead economist, a senior Sierra Club spokesperson, a prominent oil industry analyst, and president of business and industry for the state to get their reaction to the climate orders.
I think it's important for us to put these recent executive orders and really the government's role into the broader context of the long run changes that we're seeing in the economy. You know, even before these executive orders, we were hearing more and more from some of the major oil and gas companies about long-term plans to reduce their dependence on traditional resources and start incorporating more alternative fuels into their portfolios. You know, so this is something that the private sector was starting to think about. I think what we see here is an effort to try to accelerate that change and really push it forward at a much faster pace. And the government certainly can play a role in doing so. But when you accelerate the pace of change, you're going to end up bringing alongside more economic damage and transition costs.
The president has set forth a vision of hope for new jobs in Louisiana, especially around the issue of wind farms, wind industry. Louisiana builds ships. We have the skilled workers to do that material. We have a plant already in New Orleans East building windmill blades. I could see this pushing forward Louisiana's skilled workers and create more jobs.
In the energy business, when you've got billions of dollars that are on the line and at stake, uncertainty is the bugaboo that mixes everything up and creates problems. And just in case in point, just Chevron speaking to investors just as recently as I think yesterday, stating that, yeah, there's going to be an impact, but we don't know that other than the general announcement, we don't know the details and we don't know how this is going to work. So how this is going to affect our operations in the offshore Gulf of Mexico is still a little bit ambiguous. While it does have potential to have pretty significant impacts on the state across a wide range of sectors, not just in drilling and in production activities, there's still a lot of uncertainty associated with what this is going to mean and the speed at which it's going to be taken.
I think there's two key responses we would have. One is, I would argue there's no state that's more harmed by those actions than Louisiana. And two, if the stated goal by the administration was to help improve environmental protection, I would argue that those actions actually were a step in the wrong direction. If you look at our petroleum production in Louisiana, over 90% of that happens in the Gulf of Mexico. And so as federal waters are taken off the table with leasing and soon permits, I think what you're going to see is those investment dollars, those long-term investment dollars, start to dry up here in our federal waters and instead pivot to other areas where they're welcomed. And what the president's actions have done is it sent me those investment decisions maybe to other states with more private land that produces, like in West Texas, or other countries like Russia and Iran and those. And so I don't think that's good for American energy security. I don't think those countries are very environmentally friendly in how they produce resources.
We need to move to create new great jobs that will pay benefits. And that's going to be the struggle between all of us working together to find a path forward into the future.
By making a quick move with executive orders, President Biden has, put forward some policies that will cause some economic damage. And we're yet to hear what exactly might be on the table in terms of helping to bring some new opportunities and some other activities that our businesses and our workers can get engaged in to take its place.
We felt we were long overdue to get a COVID impact on our mental health as we begin to close in on 1 year of life few of us could have imagined a year ago today. So how are we coping with COVID? When we first talked with Baton Rouge psychotherapist Leslie Todd, we were 3 weeks into the pandemic. Life had dramatically changed with lockdowns and a tough new normal. Cases and deaths were climbing and the mental stressors were taking hold. 10 months later, the long haul continues.
We always do better with anxiety when there's an endpoint. And so everybody's looking for an endpoint. And of course, the magic of January 1st of every year is we feel we have a fresh start.
Yeah.
And for this particular year, there were some things that looked hopeful for a fresh start. We have the vaccines. We knew that we had at least 2 that were going to come out. Some people felt better that the election was over. There were other things that felt like a fresh start. But there isn't the end to our worries. And so all of us, if we say, if only I can get to X, we're in trouble if the X doesn't happen. So if you pinned your hopes to January 1st, well, now you're disappointed. And all of us are coaxing ourselves along the best we can.
But the best way for many is a moment-by-moment struggle. The CDC says more than 2 in 5 people in the U.S. report having mental or behavioral health issues related to the pandemic. Anxiety, depression, increased substance abuse, and thoughts of suicide. That's 40% of all people.
Normally, anxiety resolves itself because the problems resolve, but this particular set of things gets more complicated. So we've had surges, we've had new variants, we've had all kinds of things with COVID that make it a non-ending kind of anxiety. It's turn of the screw. There's always more. So particularly with it'll all be better on January 1st, well, picking an end date to things like that just doesn't work because it's not an on-off switch. In terms of the symptoms that people are still having, the number one thing I see is insomnia. So much insomnia. And I think it's just because we're revved up at a level that we're not used to all the time, especially those parents with those kids at home. Or, if you're not sure if you're going to get your next paycheck, or you haven't found a new job, or you're working 6 jobs to, gig economy stuff. I think the anxiety is showing up a lot as insomnia.
How we cope, Todd says, will take inner strength. Expect to have a lot of mixed feelings and expect to work extra hard to manage our emotions and manage our lives.
I spend my time outdoors. That's the thing I do. And I tell everybody, get outdoors. If it's just in your backyard, get some sun on your face, walk, look at the trees. There's nothing more spiritual to me than nature, to remind ourselves that the world will go on, that we're a part of something bigger. When you talk about anxiety, whose anxiety are you talking about? There's anxiety on a whole lot of levels, not just my personal life, but if I were a person of color, I'd have a whole different set of anxieties. And there's broader social injustices that have come to light with COVID as well. It's a big package. This isn't just a disease.
Before the pandemic, it was likely that college athletes had a future to look forward to, ones that involved college scholarships and maybe a spot on the team. But these aren't options for everyone anymore. I spoke with high school football coach Gabe Fertitta, and he says the new restrictions are making it harder for high school athletes to advance.
This is George Hart, an 18-year-old with a life full of possibilities still ahead, especially when it comes to football. But like a lot of activities, the pandemic changed the way he participated.
There's a lot more like guidelines we have to follow, especially like at a high school level than we're used to. Just especially at practice, trying to like stay distance because we don't really have masks on with the helmets and stuff. Bringing our own waters to practice, that's different. Even in the locker room, like and meetings are kind of get dismissed at like staggered times to come to like go to the locker room. So like we're not all clumped up at one time. And just taking a lot more precautions to make sure everybody is safe.
But one of the worst sides of this virus, from the eyes of a student athlete, are the prospects that won't be there. Normally, during the summer, students like George would be getting ready for football camps where they could train and get exposure, or scouts might be coming to see him practice or play a football game. But COVID closed the majority of the camps, and scouts couldn't visit.
That's my expectation before all COVID and stuff hit. Was to be able to actually see them in face-to-face in person instead of over all technology.
Hart's coach, Gabe Fertitta, says his players looking to play on a college level are struggling for several reasons.
The coaches didn't get to come by to gather names. They were taken off the road before that ever happened. And then we didn't even have spring practice. That was not even a thing. And then the college summer camps didn't happen. These evaluation camps at the colleges also didn't happen. So that in and of itself is a giant struggle for a 2021 grad, the guys that are going to graduate this spring.
Adding to that list, the NCAA rolled out new regulations for athletes. They extended the year of eligibility to 2020 freshmen to give them another shot to play. But the problem here is that kids like Hart may not get a spot on a college team because that slot is already occupied by someone who's played before.
I understand the genesis of why they originally wanted to do that. Everybody, no matter who you talk to, has said they should have put a game cap on that. Like, in other words, if a kid at LSU, say, played in 5 games, then, hey, he got a season, he got some games. He shouldn't get just a free year of eligibility. But instead of doing that, they granted the entire NCAA an extra year of eligibility.
Fertitta says you can try to get around this, but it'll be hard. He says you can go to a junior college and try to make the team there, but you'd be working against limited spots and big competition from all over the state. You could also just walk on to a team, but that would mean you wouldn't get a scholarship. You'd pay out of pocket, which is pretty expensive, especially if you're coming from out of state.
A lot of states are not as lucky as ours to have a program like TOPS that gives them free tuition to a public university. So that's an expensive proposition to walk on somewhere. You're saying, I'm going to pay my own way in order to be on the team. And a lot of these kids don't have the means to pay $40,000 and $50,000 a year to go to school, when normally they would be getting a scholarship somewhere that they'd be making money to go to school.
The guidelines for freshman eligibility, Fertitta can't change, but as for camps, he found a creative way to get the kids exposure. Here's a video of one of his students during a virtual combine. He has his weight and height listed, plus scouts can see him practice, something they would have seen in person if not for COVID-19.
There's nothing you could do with it, so you just have to find ways to, get in touch with them. So just realizing it and coping with it and just getting over it was the only thing you really could do.
1, 2, 1.
George also has a tape out online.
2, 1.
He says he's using social media to get his name out, and so far it seems to have been working.
We were emailing grad assistants, posting videos on Twitter, just doing following coaches, hoping they would follow me back so I can DM them on Twitter, just doing anything I could to get in touch with them.
Right now, his prospects are good. He's gotten a few offers from different colleges. Nowhere near the amount he would have seen before the virus, but just enough to give him some options and some hope.
I don't know exactly yet where I'm going to decide to go, but just probably making that decision I'm looking forward to. And yeah, and also graduation.
National Signing Day was Wednesday, and Hart signed with Arizona State as a preferred walk-on. The history and culture of black churches and their relationship with Christianity is broad. I spoke with several members of historically black Louisiana churches to understand how they came to be and how this state shaped them.
We've had so many people to be here. Buffalo Soldiers were here. Prince Hall Masons were started here. There's so many things. If you look at the windows in the church, in the sanctuary here, you'll see history printed up there.
Rodrine Washington has lived her 77 years of life through this church. The St. James African Methodist Episcopal in New Orleans, where her family attended since the 1940s. Race wasn't something she was insecure about here. This place was a sanctuary. It had been that way since the late 1840s when it was built. This is a common origin for most of Louisiana's black churches. They start out as safe havens for slaves and people of color, an alternative to a brutal reality.
It was, to a certain extent, a response to terror and white racial terror. But there was also this other side that was just something creative and a way of relating to the world and the cosmos.
For a time, whites, slaves, and freed people of color worshipped in the same building in some Protestant Louisiana churches. But the message taught from the pulpit was distinctly white. Salvation meant hardship on earth before going to heaven. It meant obedience to masters. The black members of the St. James Methodist Church decided to take that idea and blow it up.
These folks decided, we don't want to live like this or to worship like this. So they started their own church. They left that church in 1844.
To build the church, when they did build this church, the ladies carried the bricks from the river in their aprons. The men carried the boards on their shoulders.
African Americans in the United States, especially in the 19th century, took elements from Africa, Native American culture, and Europeans, and blended that into a uniquely African American system. That's part of the genius and creativity of African American religion.
Suddenly, church looked very different. People were singing and clapping. Sometimes a person might fall out and catch the Holy Ghost. These are bits and pieces of a culture slaves and people of color can scarcely remember that is incorporated into a new faith, one where they matter.
Jesus was someone much more intimate. Jesus was friend, right? Jesus wasn't someone distant. And this actually comes from African American religion.
But even with similarity, black churches are not the same. Though they're united in their faith, when it comes to culture and tradition, that varies. The Catholic Church in Louisiana is a prime example.
It was different because they accepted the blacks to come to church with them, even though you had to sit on the left side.
The color line is slightly different. Here at Immaculate Heart of Mary in Merrigan, the black and white congregation sat together, separate, but together. That's not something you'd see often, especially not in the Jim Crow South.
Back then, the black Baptists had the black church and the white Baptists had the white church. That's what it were, They went to their church and the whites went to theirs.
Immaculate Heart of Mary, or St. Mary Mission Chapel as it was first called, was built by former slaves in 1870. Somewhere in that time, whites started attending. But this Catholic church was different from the rest. In the late 60s, during the turmoil of the civil rights movement, the racial dynamic here changed.
That priest was here after 5 hours, and I don't forgot what his name was. He didn't go for that. He said, we all gonna sit together. This ain't no segregated church, we gonna get together.
But whether Catholic or Protestant, each black church has played an important role, not just in Louisiana, but the whole nation.
What makes American religion American is the African and African American.
As part of LPB's Louisiana Black Churches Special, we'll be airing an episode every week for the month of February, highlighting the state's historical black churches and how they've influenced different aspects of our lives. Please join us this Monday evening, February 8th, for an LPB virtual event, Louisiana's Black Church, in partnership with Louisiana's HBCU Advisory Council. It's from 6:30 to 8 p.m. and it's free. RSVP at lpb.org/theblackchurch.
And everyone, that is our show for this week. Remember, you can watch anything LPB anytime, wherever you are, with our LPB app.
You can catch LPB news and public affairs shows as well as other Louisiana programs you've come to enjoy over the years. And please like us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
For everyone here at Louisiana Public Broadcasting, I'm Andre Moreau.
And I'm Kara St. Cyr.
Until next time, that's the state we're in.
Entergy is proud to support programming on LPB and greener practices that preserve Louisiana.
The goal of our environmental and sustainability initiatives really is to ensure that our kids and future generations can be left with a cleaner planet.
Additional support provided by the Fred B. and Ruth B. Ziegler Foundation and the Ziegler Art Museum located in Jennings City Hall. The museum focuses on emerging Louisiana artists and is an historical and cultural center for Southwest Louisiana. And the Foundation for Excellence in Louisiana Public Broadcasting, with support from viewers like you.
Funding for the Stories of Louisiana's Black Church is provided by.
When morning came to Louisiana, we were hopeful, not hibernating. We were stronger, ready for what's next. And together, as we build anew, Blue Cross stands ready to support you.
Hi, I'm Patrick, employee at ExxonMobil and pastor of Believers Assembly of Baton Rouge. I'm so glad ExxonMobil is sponsoring the Louisiana Black Church on LPB, and I hope you enjoy watching it.
And by CSRS, building stronger, smarter communities together.